Let's roll with it. We got the brilliant Ryan Hallquist and Nikesh Patel here, our strategy and digital studios, and we're going to talk Workiva.
Yeah.
What else would we want to do on a Tuesday afternoon?
Let's do
Most
it.
of my days talking Workiva.
It's very enjoyable. It's very enjoyable. All right, so let's start off. I'm curious, what were your first impressions of the Workiva problem when they came to us? What was the actual problem they were trying to solve? And was it similar or dissimilar to what they said they wanted to solve?
I'd say it was pretty similar throughout. So I had been involved kind of from the latter parts of just getting onboarded with them in the pitching phase on through DECS, and it was pretty consistent in the sense of, yes, obviously they, like, the business thing was they needed more leads, right? As many SaaS clients do, but the kind of overarching problem that was being solved was we don't know how to explain what we do. They have so many different audiences, and they do, Workiva, the platform, does so many things for each of those audiences, that the struggle was without having that kind of cohesive brand identity to, I think we refer to it sometimes as like the dinner party pitch version of summing up what you do, who you do it for, and why you do it. That was a kind of a segmented challenge across all of their different business units.
Right. Did they understand that that was the challenge, or did they think there was something else?
I think everyone understood that was part of it, which became more clear throughout the DDCS, which was our data-driven creative strategy that we put together for them. That was essentially where we felt the point of emphasis was, and I think to some extent they agreed, because by the end of it, we all felt that was, if we didn't get that right, then anything beyond that would be challenging. So yeah, I think there was, even if that wasn't the main kind of reason for them knocking on the door, or us being at the door, it definitely ended up being a very pivotal part of what we needed to do.
And that's great, because often with an existing business that's successful, there's pushback when we challenge. Do you know your audience? Do you know what you sell? Can you articulate what you sell? Did you find that there was pushback from them, maybe Ryan, from the people who've been there for a long time, about defining their audience, or were they very receptive to the fact that we have to do the research, we have to do the strategy, we have to define it for the first time appropriately?
There wasn't really like audience pushback. If anything, I don't think we wanted to push back on the audience, because they have so many different audiences and know them so well. So for us, the push was more trying to just, it's like wrestling an octopus. Like
most things are.
Naturally.
But there were so many messages, so many audiences, and you're trying to convey like brand meaning. And if anything, they were very receptive to it, because it's overwhelming, right? Like they had no problem generating messages and ideas, but how do you organize it, deploy it in a kind of a thoughtful manner, while also making sure people know who we are and what we do. And so it felt more like we were a life preserver, in a way of like, great, we have help and we have outside, kind of fresh eyes to help kind of make sense of all of this.
So wrestling an octopus, where did we start?
You gotta be dry. If you're wet, it's just
we started at the, so there's a relationship of both. You need the brand message, but you also have to make sure that each of the audiences, and in Workiva's case, they essentially have a pod team around each of those audiences. So those are the experts that know their accounting audience or their sustainability audience better than anyone else. Making sure you have the right balance between, we have this brand message, and though it's meant to explain Workiva as a whole, each of those different layers of audiences and industries has to work for them to. So I think that was probably the main challenge. But and that was something where, even though we had set out since the DDCS to kind of crack that code, had taken many iterations well beyond that. But like simultaneously, we really did have to focus on both that overarching brand and the audiences that made that up.
What would you say was the most impactful thing we did in the setting the foundation?
I think it was, having to create the organizing structure for all these different messages, because they're two totally different disciplines, right? Like, you're trying to kind of crystallize and storytell on a brand is one thing. Trying to organize and deploy, a funnel-based drip of marketing messages, it's just using different muscles. And that was where so much of the volume was from. And there was a term I was introduced to early on working on the business, which was random acts of marketing. And so how do you, try and stop that, and more than anything, like, funnel it into a kind of a disciplined, organized, kind of flow. I think that was the most impactful thing, because that is serving their needs of, kind of keeping a flowing pipeline of sales leads, but also, again, managing that conversation, right? Like, if there's your elevator pitch, oftentimes marketers want to, like, hit that, like, stop button on the elevator and say, okay, now that I've got you trapped here, let me tell you all of these things about my company. And how do you prevent that, right? And how do you say, okay, we have to lay out our story in a way that best matches these people where they are, instead of just trying to say everything about us everywhere all the time, because then you're going to fail at telling anything about your brand, and you're going to fail at getting specific messages that you want them to take away.
Right. I want to pivot for a second. We hear the phrase random acts of marketing quite often. What does that mean to you?
Not having a plan. Like, it's just, especially, we work with such a wide range of clients, but especially, either whether they're startups or just emerging businesses, there's all this enthusiasm, right? Of I'm passionate about what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure it out. I want to make this impact. And that's hard to stop yourself and say, hold on, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Do I need to introduce myself before I get into X, Y, and Z? Well, introducing myself feels like there's no ROI on that, so maybe I do this. So I think it's really, important to realize that, there's a great John Wooden quote of "Don't mistake activity for achievement." Like, you need to understand that chaos is not productive marketing. Like, having that moment to take a breath, again, kind of lay out your vision and what you want to accomplish, is going to be more effective medium and long term than just, what about this, what about this, what about this. And so I get the impulse for random acts of marketing because it's a chance to kind of fill the void. But it's, I guess, the blessing and curse of my role in the organization to constantly be advocating for, we can get to all of those things. It's like sequencing a record or something, right? Like, there's a flow to how the tracks unravel. If you're really trying to lay out a masterpiece versus just like a bunch of songs that may sound all over the map. Like, people may not get your vision; they may just be inundated by noise.
Right. Who are your favorite people at Workiva?
Shout out to my guy Daniel.
Of course.
I've probably spent just as much time with Daniel on things over the course of the last 3-ish years we've been on Workiva than people on my own team at times. But like, that's part of the reason why is because it's just been so collaborative. Like there are a lot of things that he relies on us for. There's also Workiva's very large, and we are a small team in comparison, so there's a lot that we require out of them, and so kind of out of that necessity of having to lean on each other, that helps quite a bit, to just kind of keep us understanding that we're on the same team, rather than it feeling like, hey, we need you guys to do this thing, or hey, Daniel, we need you to just approve this, like constantly.
Right.
Having that conversation go both ways has helped out a lot.
Yeah, Daniel's awesome. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, Daniel's awesome. I mean, normally, a client in his role sits outside of my world, just because once things get that executional, I'm usually kind of out of the equation. But that's not the case on Workiva, and to have not only a working relationship but a good one with somebody in that role, he's awesome. His partnership with Nikesh is like just massive for the success of that business. Kristen, Kolb, Sonia are have both been really just great partners, easy to work with. Bill Cap, always loved working with a baseball fan.
Big Phillies guy.
Yeah.
Oh, I got a couple. So
Yeah.
Workiva was gracious enough to extend us an invite out to one of their bigger marketing meetings in Denver, and they're located all over the country. So these are only people I've only interacted with a couple times. One of the funniest people I've ever met was a guy, Mike G, who I believe is on their content team. He's just a very big personality, and quite literally big, because he was the only person on our remote visual screen at the time, and his backgrounds were fun. I remember those. And then Adam V. Vernick, maybe is his name. He works on their email team. One of genuinely the most interesting people I had ever met. Maybe talked to him for 45 minutes.
Wow.
At whatever the Happy Camper equivalent bar is out in Denver. And he's like a teacher and like a tech guy, and he plays in a metal band, and just like a very cool. There's so many cool people.
Ooh.
So many cool people at Workiva, and these are people I've maybe only met.
Oh, that's awesome. So shout out for the lesser known.
Those
behind the camera.
Yeah, we've been able to at least interact with so many Workiva people.
That's awesome.
At this point.
All right, getting back on the path of what we were doing for them. So we lay out the plan. What was our process? We're trying to tackle so many different things. We have to create the brand, we have to find the audience, etc.
Yeah.
Rather than not create the brand, but refine the positioning and the narrative. What was our process, or what went well, or what maybe could have gone better from what we did?
Everything starts with planning, like Ryan said. Like, it's just getting organized. For me, that means a lot of spreadsheets and having just like a prioritization plan. There was a lot that needed to be accomplished, but there were a lot of kind of micro steps that were taken. Some were obviously more simple, some were more complex, but the first one is just, regardless of what we do, we need to be able to track this efficiently. So conversion tracking was one of the first things where, again, we had help from people at Workiva, but they essentially weren't able to have a clear picture of when conversions were happening on the site. Were they demo requests? Were they contact forms? Were they blog submissions? Were they anything in between? Like, we needed to at least get that clarity there, and then apply that clarity consistently across each of their channels, so that the Google Ads setup is not different than the LinkedIn setup, is not different than the Meta setup. So getting just cleanliness accounted for before we even start campaign planning was massive. At that point, then it's understanding each of the audiences, making sure that, like Ryan mentioned, at each particular point we want to engage. Workiva has the luxury of having a lot of really, really insightful content. Like, let's make sure that whether it's validated through on-page engagement data, whether it's through search volume, whether it's anecdotally through the industry pods, the industry leaders, to say, like, this is a piece of content that's highly relevant, like starting to map all of those things out to that journey. like, hey, we have these resources, we have these landing pages, we have these solutions, we have these job titles, like making sure everything kind of slots in to what we use as a deliverable, which is our media mix. But it's essentially just a puzzle that we're filling out. It starts relatively the same way, where we need to know what our campaigns, our audiences, our targeting levers, like all of these things are, our budgets. And as we get information, we need to just start filling in the pieces of this puzzle. And that's essentially our media mix process. And in doing that, we realize what we still need to uncover. Like, oh, hey, yeah, actually, how are we targeting people across the board at the middle of the funnel? Should we use page views based on this or that? Should we use engagements with past content? So like, as you get through that organization plan, you realize what gaps you really have, and it kind of forces you to address them before you continue on to execute anything.
I had never written a creative brief in a spreadsheet. That's normally my cue that it's time to leave. But to Nikesh's point of the importance of organization on a project like this was, so critical. I'm trying to, connect the dots between, for each of these different audience groups, what is the kind of the mindset at every stage in this funnel. What are the messages, what are the pieces that we are driving them towards? Like it was the the inverse of the creative brief that is meant to be like a springboard to creative thought. That would have been the worst possible thing for this project. It was so much about focus, distillation, and clarity. And if you work with Nikesh, you're working in spreadsheets. And but it's a credit to him for building like a very turnkey, truly a system for how to be thinking about this project. Not this is my thing, and then you do your work and your thing, and they'll all sync up. Like, we needed a central place to have everything accessible. Otherwise, you're just going to get lost in the volume.
Right.
And so that was a really helpful way to, and again, a different way, but it forced us to, work and think in a very deliberate manner that I think was just really important for something that was as involved as what we were.
Right. You mentioned how we work with many different people on their team. This project also touched many of our studios. So can you talk a little bit about collaboration within our studios on the project from inception through execution?
Yeah. So like Ryan mentioned, our main touch point is figuring out, again, outside of creative at this point, but just here's our audiences, what levers do we have to reach them, and what's the general theme of the messages we're trying to get across at each of those touch points before we really flesh them out into individual creative. At that point, when we get to something that we feel good about, we make sure it aligns with what the client's expecting, and they feel good about the direction that we're headed. At that point, within hopefully the same spreadsheet tab to again keep everyone on the same page, but we'll be able to essentially have all of that information compound on top of each other into then for our friends on the creative team, like here's like the platforms we're using to accomplish these goals. Here are the specs of the channels and the assets that you'll need to be able to essentially take the territories that Ryan has created and build them out to what eventually becomes out in the market, like executed creative ads. And so that's really like between digital strategy, creative, and then account overseeing everything between like, when do we need reviews, who's responsible for this, when does this need to get done, communicating to the client in case, hey, we actually need XYZ resource, or like anything in between. That's essentially those four teams at that point pretty much working working together, even though it kind of goes in stages. But at that point, everyone's kind of all hands on deck.
Amazing. All right, so now let's get into the execution. We have the plan together. We know what we're going to do. We have all the studios collaborating with their teams as well. We hit the ground running. What was surprising about the results that we're seeing or not seeing from executing the work that we planned out?
For me, one of the things that stood out was, well, first of all, on the just on the creative side, Workiva also just being able to leverage a brand that has like a unique playfulness to it that is uncommon in the space.
Yeah.
So that was one thing where like just kind of from starting out was something I didn't expect necessarily. We did have part of our DECS was a competitor audit where you can see very clearly that we have a very cool arsenal at our disposal for our creative team to be able to leverage. So that was one thing of like, oh wow, we are really able to take these things that have to do with whether it's SEC filing or sustainability management and like showcase them in a way that like stands out on your feed. So a lot of that obviously is a credit to Workiva having those assets, but then our creative team being able to come in there, truly like understand. So that's another kind of intersection, is them working with the design team at Workiva with Claire and the team to like really understand how can we use the brand, what's an area we can play with, what's kind of like what should we keep by the book, and just them being able to leverage, whether it's through animations, the hand-drawn elements. That was one thing I was surprised by. Is like we can actually do a lot of really cool things in a space that's otherwise very like by the book for for necessity's sake. It has to be. But I always enjoy that, and from a performance standpoint, you can see that a lot of times show up in the way that engagement looked in the reporting that we had. So there's kind of the dichotomy of engagement on the ad side, just getting people to the site, and then engagement on the conversion side. But like the ad side is a reflection of how well our collective teams have pieced together the audience targeting, the timing, and then ultimately the creative. And we've always seen a lot of engagement coming from those audiences for Workiva.
Ryan, from a foundational strategy, forecasting, planning, we make our best predictions. Was anything surprising?
I think the most surprising thing for me was that kind of conventional brand awareness messaging ended up kind of, I don't want to say performing poorly, but more so that as we continued to refine the plan, some of that more traditional brand storytelling messaging came later in the funnel than I would have expected. And the biggest thing that happened was that we had originally built out this marketing funnel that we were like, all right, this is natural, right? You start broad and you get narrower and narrower. You come out the end and the sale is converted, everyone high fives, and we do it all over again. To go back and you say, okay, we can refine this funnel. I guess it makes sense. I have multiple funnels in my house for different things in my kitchen. But for Workiva, it was the biggest understanding, or the biggest eye opener for me was the understanding of being able to give something of value to the audience that didn't really have a sales pitch attached to it. And then, I guess that makes sense if you think of it as a dating metaphor. You want to, get the other person talking, right? Because that makes you seem interesting, even though you're not doing anything.
Dating pro, right?
Yes.
But to be able to, instead of saying, well, we have to build this understanding of who we are before we can move on and talk about what we do and why it matters. But to instead say, if we are giving things of value, that's going to get attention in a more organic way than saying, take a second and listen to who we are as a brand and what we believe in. It makes sense, but it goes against a lot of marketing training. A lot of clients, you'd say, okay, first thing you need to do is get an understanding of who you are, because otherwise, when you tell all these things, people are going to say, I don't know who this is, or I'm going to apply credit to a different brand. So in this case, we were able to do that brand storytelling kind of in the mix, but it wasn't the first thing that we needed to open with. And so that for me was an important learning as we continued to refine this machine.
We had probably made that shift a few months in, and everything looked drastically different before and after making that change. And so originally, like Ryan mentioned, we were starting with that like message of, this is what we do as a platform, tackle your data with confidence and clarity, that type of tone. That was the first touch point, where that educational component came after. But kind of flipping that order and treating that at the broadest targeting level, putting our eggs in the like thought leadership and really flexing the years and years of experience and knowledge that Workiva has at the forefront of this funnel, at the very first, at the starting gate, essentially, to build that trust first before giving that pitch, ended up making a huge difference in the long run.
And it's kind of a subtle but important shift, because it really went from a very, patriarchal way of saying like, okay, we are going to reach out to you and pull you through this sales funnel. Like, we're going to guide you through this, which can work. But the big, I think, discovery in this was the acceptance of, instead of saying, we're going to take you on this journey, it's let's be better attuned to what you might be looking for at your stage in, whether it's your pain points or if you're actively shopping for a SaaS solution, to say, let's understand what you're looking for, and then get to talking about us. And the messages didn't change dramatically, but it was just a little bit of a attitudinal shift. And it's a good, reminder for everybody, no matter what you're marketing, that base understanding of who is your audience and what do they need. And what they need doesn't have to be more of me as like the first starting point is an important lesson, right? Because you want to get them listening, and the better that you can show that you get them is a way more palatable approach than to say, well, no, listen, you need me.
Right.
Like that is, that's going to tune a lot of people off right away.
Right. And that's applicable to many clients across industries.
Yeah.
Exclusive to Workiva. The results were incredible. They speak for themselves. As we know, we don't do what we do for fun. It's fun.
That's why we're on this private jet right now.
Exactly. But it's about the ROI of the results. The results speak for themselves. What are you most proud of, the work that we did and the results that we're generating?
I'm proud that our goals changed as we went through this, because originally, I think when we had started with Workiva, it was just we just need more MQLs or SALs, whichever they were prioritizing at the time. And based on the results we've seen from 2024 being the first full year of this kind of completed evergreen approach, our mentality is now on opportunities. So instead of earlier on in the funnel, where we're just trying to have people to accept. Now it's like, not only are you accepting them, but they are not just opportunities, qualified opportunities. So now our goals are shifting to saying, okay, we can really make an impact here at a much more significant part of our pipeline than we had originally thought. And so just knowing that, okay, like now, our process is still the same, but like our metrics are now tied to like basically one step before being a closed won deal. Like that is that to me is the most telling thing that could have happened, because if we were nowhere close,
Right.
then if anything, we're shifting now
Yeah.
backwards of like, let's just get leads rather
Yeah.
than qualified leads or sales accepted
Right.
leads. And now we're talking qualified opportunities. Is really a testament to how far it's been able to go so far.
That's value. That's providing actual value, real, tangible, measurable value.
And what I guess impressed me the most was like that we did it. Yeah, and what I mean by that is, this is going to sound like a very Pollyanna, thing, but the amount of people that are involved, not only within Mabbly, different departments at Workiva, it's like how a bill becomes a law, like Schoolhouse Rock style. Like the amount of people involved with objectives by their individual department working for a collective goal, that there are content generators over at Workiva that are working with some of those specific verticals, that is, like, just the amount of hands that touch the process, and to have that work effectively is just pretty impressive. It's a testament to communication and to partnership. There are so many different ways for something like that, for either balls to get dropped or just things to get gummed up. People leave and agendas change and all of those different things. But I think it really speaks to a strong client relationship, that the time, the patience, the effort to get all of these things fed in, built in this kind of calm structure that we talked about, implemented, measured, adjusted, is pretty remarkable for something that presents as very mechanical and procedural. You don't often see something like this get to a point where we're talking about it on record, months later. And so it reflects well on Mabbly, it reflects well on Workiva, and it reflects well on the partnership.
And this, I'd say probably, because we're talking about 7 audiences for Workiva across 3 channels, and kind of creating full funnels for each, and then having a brand message in addition. This is kind of like a layered approach across probably a year and a half, and then in the 6 to 8 months since each of those kind of boxes were checked between audiences and funnels, like continuous monitoring and refinement on top of that. So it never really ends. The process to even get to the completed structure that we set out to create was a lot of people, a lot of time, but like that's why hopefully we see the dividends we see, because we spend the time to try to create the process to get here. And so it's nice to be able to just see how things are going and find areas to improve, rather than to like continuously like build and build and build. And that's what can happen if your plans are either non-existent or just kind of loose from them.
Yeah. To build on something we talked about earlier, you talked about the Wooden quote of differentiating activity and achievement. There's also the elements of focus and persistence that we're going to see this thing through. We're going to set the foundation. We're not just going to abandon it if it deviates. It will deviate. The plan will change. Cash talked about changing goals. We will change them. That's okay. It's embracing that change and having the agility to do so, rather than being rigid and saying, well, this was the plan we set at the strategy level. Let's not change it. When you see it through and you believe in not just the plan, but the people executing the plan, that's when we typically see very positive results. Well, this was a pleasure. I hope we could do this every Tuesday. This would definitely make my week even that much better. So thanks for taking the time. You both are the best.
Of course, appreciate it. Yeah.
Anytime.